What is the word Free Palestine? What's the agenda really all about? This is Bill Maher having a bit of a debate with his panelists. Have a watch.
Let's say they get what they want. Because I hear this all over. I see it in the memes, Free Palestine. Okay. What is that? What does it look like when they get what they want? Because what did the 9 million Jews in Israel do? Did they just disappear?
Yes. That's the idea. They don't say it explicitly.
But where do they go?
Into the ocean or into their graves.
No. That is not what is meant by Free Palestine. Some people mean it that way. A lot of people, most Palestinians I know and work with, including Israelis who work with us, mean it to end the occupation. Give the Palestinians a state.
But what happens when they do? They did it in Gaza. They gave it to them. And did they use it to build a state? No, they used it to bring in weapons and attack them.
That is a really incomplete description
what else
happened in Gaza. If you go back to 2005, when Ariel Sharon decided to withdraw from Gaza under pressure from the Bush administration to seek, to really negotiate with the Palestinians, his advisor said publicly, we are using the Gaza withdrawal to put the peace process in formaldehyde. It was a tactic by the Sharon government to avoid having to negotiate. So it was not a step toward the creation of a Palestinian state. But it was a step
so
towards
you think, okay,
it.
let's just take the West Bank, which is more moderate, more reasonable. Okay, let's say that they withdraw completely.
Hamas would take over tomorrow if that were to happen. If Israel were to remove its security forces.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's right. Because
Hamas
the Palestinian Authority is weak, feckless,
would take over the West Bank.
The West Bank, absolutely. Right. And Israel can't have a Hamas statelet in the West Bank. It's right next to Jerusalem.
And then what would happen if
there's no disagreement? But again, how did we get here? And again, we don't. I want to there is the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, who does three things: he sleeps, he smokes, and wakes up to say something dumb about the Holocaust.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Right. Again, this is not someone who has done good for the Palestinian people.
Okay, but if Hamas, if they took over the West, of course, we know who sponsors them.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned Iran yet.
Okay, Hamas is a pimp. They could never have outfought Israel. It was Iran all along.
Yep.
And they would, if you don't think they would if they got a nuclear weapon, that's another moral equivalency we have to discuss.
Israel has equivalency to say that Iran is not suicidal, and also say Iran has a relationship with Hamas, but there is no evidence that Iran played a role here.
That's not true at all. There was a report last week in the Wall Street Journal, and they've been funding Hamas
that
for
report
decades.
I know the report you're talking about.
Matt, whether or not they said attack them on Saturday on this particular day is irrelevant. Okay, they have been equipping and arming and strategizing with Hamas for decades, and Hezbollah on the northern border. It all goes back to Tehran.
It's so interesting because when he said at the start, the first panelist said, most Palestinians that I speak to, they just want end to the occupation and they want self-determination. Meanwhile, he concedes moments later that if Israel was to pull out of Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank as it's known, then Hamas would take over. So, which one is it? And he'll say, well, maybe Hamas they're more powerful, they're a more powerful militant group. But actually, according to polling conducted by a Palestinian polling survey organization, and this was reported by Reuters, every few months they do polling to see whether Arabs in Judea and Samaria and Gaza still support what Hamas did on October 7th. Most of them still do. We're talking like 70 to 80%. So when he says most Palestinians want just end to the occupation, what do they really want? Why is there this occupation in the first place? Why did that start? Well, what happened was, in 1947, there were Jews living there. The Jews had lived there for thousands of years. In fact, the only sovereign state that's ever existed in that land has been Jewish. And then nations and empires have conquered it, renamed it Palestine, but it was really Judea. And then in the 1940s, there was a strong Jewish population. There was a strong Arab population there. And so the British actually, in law and the international forums prior, said, well, it can become a future Jewish state. But the United Nations then said, we'll propose just splitting it into a Jewish state and Arab state. This is before any great displacement or anything like that happened. And the Jews said sure, and the Arabs said no. And their plan was to kick the Jews into the sea and not create an Arab state. It would be taken over in chunks by Jordan and Egypt and Syria. And the proof of that is that from 1948 to 67, the chunks they did control did not become an independent Arab state. Jordan controlled Judea and Samaria, and Egypt controlled Gaza. Did they turn it into this Arab Palestinian state? No. And was there calls, big mass calls for a Palestinian state? No. And then they fight another war to try and do the same thing that they tried to do in 48, in 67. And Israel then has to take control of Judea and Samaria and Gaza, captured in a defensive war, which is utterly, utterly justified in international law, as well as just natural moral law. And that's the reason that Israel is there. Not because they're trying to occupy them or prevent self-determination. The Arabs themselves never wanted self-determination, and that fundamentally is the root point here, the fundamental issue. When he says, I speak to Arabs that say they want to end the occupation, maybe some genuinely do. Maybe that's what they're after. But it's clear to me that certainly the leadership of the Palestinians that came up with this notion of end the occupation, free Palestine, both leaders past and present, the agenda, and many of the people clearly who live in these areas, their agenda is not just about ending the occupation. Their agenda is annihilating the state of Israel. And the proof is crystal clear in the litmus test of giving autonomy to Gaza. They said, fine, we'll let you have your mini statelet. Show us that you're already after self-determination and want to make a beautiful state that people can want to live in and Arabs can thrive in. And they destroyed everything, all the infrastructure, everything that Israel had built up there. And they turned it into a weapons factory, a terror education program for kids, and the hub of practicing terrorism, culminating, of course, in October 7th. So end the occupation. If Israel were to leave Judea and Samaria, October 7th would pale in comparison to what Hamas would inevitably do, or whoever it would be that would take control of that area. So it's a nonsense. The Free Palestine and the occupation thing is a nonsense. Everything they lament, occupation, checkpoints, blockades, the recent war, none of these things would happen if they said, we're prepared to have peace with the Jews. We're prepared to accept Jewish sovereignty in the land. So all the great issues they lament, the war, the suffering, is self-inflicted. And I make no bones about that. I will state that clearly. The Palestinian construct simply bears the weight of the Arab world, parts of the Arab world that are unable to accept a Jewish state. We often think of, well, the media portrays Israel as this aggressor fighting the poor Palestinians. No, they are part of a far greater Arab world that surrounds Israel, that has tried for nearly a century to destroy the Jews. But you know what? We're starting to see good progress through the Abraham Accords, through hopefully Israel inching closer to a Saudi deal. Yes, maybe it's partly due to interests, self-interests and concern for Iran, but you know what? Great. If that's how it's going to start in the end, if it brings them together, brings them towards stronger relations, that's great. And many people thought that it was going to be, you'd have to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict first in order to resolve Israel's diplomatic relations with the Arab world. Perhaps it might be the other way around. That could be a paradigm that might surprise people. But what's clear to me is that the two-state solution notion is dead. And so indulging in these fantasies, as it seems one of Bill Maher's panelists was doing, is so unhelpful. And I actually think it's a form of extremism and being ideologically blinded. So committed to this idea of two-state solution that you don't actually see that whenever it's tried, it's utterly failed, because it's ignoring what really is the desire of the cause of the Arab leadership inside of Israel. It's not about a legitimate grievance, just wanting self-determination. It's about a hateful jihadist ideology. and that ideology has to be dismantled. Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.